Welcome. So we're going to cover some assistive technology and different strategies that you can work with clients with severe communication impairments. But before we do that, we want to learn a little bit about communication and how it develops. And generally when someone or children learn to communicate, they start out by learning some primitive communication behaviors where they will use vocalizations and laughter to communicate, and eye gaze and eye contact. They will use smiling and frowning and simple body movements. So if I were to go to feed a baby some food, if they were full, he or she would then probably turn away to say, "I'm done." So by using their body, they can tell me, "No more, I'm done." And so we start out with these basic body movements, and we can communicate back and forth without any language, without any speech, and we can communicate with our bodies. And then as communication develops, our communication behaviors become more conventional. We'll start by pointing and raising hands. So if a child wants to get picked up, they raise their hands, waving hello and goodbye, extending their hands, pushing stuff away, and head nods for yes and no, head shakes. And then as we continue to grow and develop, we become more symbolic in our communication skills, and that will include speech, and we will learn that objects can then represent something to communicate a message, and there's also picture symbols that can communicate messages, and manual signs as well. So sign language is a symbolic form of communication. And as we learn and we continue to develop from primitive conventional up to symbolic types of communication, we don't get rid of our primitive behaviors, we don't get rid of our conventional behaviors, we just add to them. And the symbolic forms of communication gives us more power to control our environment. And so, why should we teach symbolic communication? There are those little kids and those older kids as well, where they may be very good at communicating with their body, or they may not be, and speech just isn't coming along as quickly as we hope, or it's just going to be something that will be difficult for them to learn. And when we start out with kids at a very young age, we don't know whether speech is going to be a possibility or not for some. And so just to recap, I'm not quite sure where we cut out on, but we've just talked about some different types of communication behaviors. We start out with laughing and vocalizations and simple eye gaze and eye contact, and move to more conventional behaviors such as pointing and reaching and extending our hands and nodding our heads. And then we develop into more symbolic forms of communication such as speech and using object symbols and picture symbols and manual sign. So everyone kind of goes through this progress, but every now and then, due to a disability or one thing or another, children don't develop speech as easily as we hope. So sometimes we need to help them out, and there's some different strategies that can be done, and sometimes we can use some different types of technology to aid and support the communication that they do have. So whenever I introduce parents or teachers or anyone to some ideas of some technology we can use, everyone gets super excited about it until they try it. And then once they try it, sometimes it gets a little frustrating. And we've come across some different strategies that help alleviate some of that frustration, and so hopefully we can kind of share those with you today. And I've come across a few parents that say, well, why? If my child can communicate, all they have to do is say, do you want hamburger or fries? They just point to which hand, and they can communicate with their body so well. We've tried different symbolic types of communication, and it's frustrating, it's hard, it's exhausting. Why even try? And the reason why we try to teach symbolic communication is because without it, many students or many children cannot communicate ideas about the past, ideas in the future. They can't communicate about anything outside their current setting. They always have to wait for someone to offer it to them to make a choice. Or someone has to say, are you ready to read this book? And then they can communicate back with their body. So yes, they can initiate some forms of communication, which generally is protesting, but they really have a hard time initiating interactions for just fun, for social interactions, and to make comments. And so it's important to give children an opportunity to communicate above and beyond what their body can communicate. So the question is, well, which type of symbolic communication method should be chosen? There's spoken word, which is speech, the use of manual signs or American Sign Language, the option to use object symbols or picture symbols with or without speech output, such as a communication device that would allow speech output. And I've come across a few parents who say, I've been told I need to pick just one, and that's what we need to focus on, and I tend to disagree with that. I think that, number one, no matter what strategy we're going to pick, speech should always be a goal. There does come a time eventually when we understand that this child, usually as they're older, may not be using speech functionally. It may not be one of their options. And then no big deal. We've given them opportunities through other ways to communicate. But many clients who are not speaking at a young age do develop speech, so I think speech should always be a target, and that parents and caregivers need to know straight from the start, if we're going to add some assistive technology to our approach, that it will not interfere with the speech. The research is showing that it actually may enhance the use of speech, and that's something I see quite often, is that as we give someone some symbols and teach them how to communicate with them, it gives them power, and it actually sometimes prompts their speech to come. And so I think there should be a good balance, depends on the child and what their needs are based on which type of method we use, and I like to use all of them, especially working in the early intervention setting. I'm not going to rule out anything except for, depending on the disability, if someone has a severe vision impairment, we might rule out the use of using picture symbols at first. They may not be able to see them. So we're not going to necessarily use picture symbols with someone with a severe impairment. And for some children whose motor impairments won't allow them to use their hands that we would need for sign language, we'd probably rule out the use of sign language. But other than that, like I said, I think speech should always be a target and a goal. And the reason why is because as speech develops, sometimes it really helps to have some symbols to help us understand what they're saying. Some children, as their speech develops, their speech will be very hard to understand for a very long time. So when the child says ooh-ee, ooh-ee, it really helps that if they signed with it, I knew that they were trying to say cookie, and it helps alleviate a lot of frustrations. So it's important to teach caregivers to respond to the vocalizations of the children, to imitate those vocalizations to encourage more practice, and to act as though the child intended to say something. So when ma accidentally slips out, mom responds as that was mom, whether the child meant it or not. We just act as though it was meant, and hopefully we can shape that into a meaning and get them to use it more often. Manual signs is the approach I really like to use, so sign language, because it's portable. We always have our hands with us. It's great for frequently used words such as more and all done and goodbye and hello. You can use it really well because you can do hand over hand signing, and you can help guide the children into how to make the signs. If the child never uses sign language at all, it really helps aid their comprehension. If I were to use sign, if I was talking about trees, it gives a good visual representation of what I'm talking about. It slows down my speech because I'm a very poor, slow signer, and so if I were to sign while I'm speaking, it really slows me down, and that really helps children so they can actually visually see and hear and have a picture of what people are talking about. And I usually always try and forewarn all my families when I work with young children that sign language is a fabulous approach for families and parents within the home. I love it. Lots of kids will pick up quite a few signs in terms of kids with severe disabilities. But I have to forewarn them that as we move into the school system, that sometimes that approach is not going to continue on. They're going to have a lot of peers who do not know sign and will not be able to communicate with their classmates. And there are some teachers where they know some sign and some that do not. And so sometimes it flows into the classroom well and sometimes it does not. And so I always like to use a object symbol and or picture symbol approach as well, because a lot of times we get one word sign phrases and we never get past that because no one else is using sentences in sign language as well outside of the deaf community. And in this setting, there's not a lot of kids I see sign more than one word phrases at a time. But within picture symbols, I can usually get children into sentences, and everyone understands the picture symbols in a communication device of speech, so they can interact with everybody. So I like manual sign as an approach, but I don't think it should be used as an only approach in this type of a setting. So I think object symbols should be used as well. I really like object symbols used initially for food, making choices for food and drinks and toys to play with, because they're objects that are there. We can work on just offering one type of food and wait for the child's body to communicate yes or no, did you want more yogurt? And then pause and wait for them to either smile or vocalize or indicate that they want more, and let them communicate about the objects that they're seeing. Or offer two different foods, you know, do you want grapes or do you want apple, and let them through their eye gaze or through pointing or even reaching communicate back to us with food. I do not like to use picture symbols or a communication device initially with eating times, because I think eating times is a precious time that really needs to be communicated with the body. If we just slap some symbols into a communication device and let them just bump them, bump them, bump them, and say more yogurt, more yogurt, more yogurt, then we're cramming food into a child whose body's really saying, wait a minute, I'm about to choke. And so I think it's very important not to just slap some object symbol or some picture symbols into a communication device when it comes to mealtime. I think mealtime needs to be watched through body communication until there's a really good, strong sense of communicating with picture symbols before you move that into mealtime. So through mealtime, I like to use object symbols, use real food to represent what they're talking about. So one way to increase interactions is to use a menu board. So that would be just a sealed bag of real food options, stick it somewhere where the child can access it so that they can point to or reach for or grab for to indicate a choice of something that they want and actually initiate an interaction. And in terms of object symbols, I also like using the approach of a social routines basket. So we teach parents and caregivers to find an object for certain social routines, like a blanket will represent the game of peekaboo. So every time they play peekaboo, they use the same little blanket to play peekaboo, or a toy duck to sing a little rubber ducky song. I always use that toy duck when singing a favorite song of a little rubber ducky song. And then to start putting all these objects into a basket or into a spot where a child can access them. So as the child just explores and plays, if they were to pull out their little rubber ducky, mom or any of her caregiver can then say, oh, it looks like you want me to sing you a song. And that gives the child an opportunity, as they're just exploring, to initiate an interaction. I think object symbols are very good for helping to encourage eye gaze and reaching and pointing. This is a picture of a little boy who's using a box. It's just a box made out of cardboard with some dividers put in it, where we could put the objects into the box to divide out what his choices are, and then all he has to do is reach for it if you have a child who has good reaching skills. And so as he's reached for the bubbles, we know he's made the choice to say, let's blow some bubbles. And then the box can be covered up with just some plexiglass, and then it encourages pointing. And those objects now are no longer just objects you reach for. Those objects become symbols where the child now can point to and indicate that they want more bubbles. So instead of actually reaching in and pulling those bubbles out, I would then grab other bubbles and say, oh, you're pointing to bubbles, you're telling me you want to blow bubbles, and then we'd blow bubbles from other bubbles. So you can use these objects to start teaching them that they're going to now represent an action. Object symbols, I really like to work with children with vision impairments. You can use either the real objects, parts of objects, and on this website that's listed on the PowerPoint is a tactile symbol kind of a formula for how you would make some tactile symbols, and it's a really nice language structure that they've used to help organize some symbols that are tactile so that you can feel the language of what it is that they're requesting and talking about. There are communication devices out there that allow you to use object symbols with voice output or speech output. So as you put the objects on the communication device, you would simply record in your speech to the different buttons, and they could just feel the objects and then drop their hand down to call out. And this I really like for children who don't have the motor skills to just reach through a basket and look for stuff, or to crawl over to you or run over to you and hand you the object to make a request. This would be the child who would be not able to move around, and so that they would need to be able to holler out across the room that they wanted they would like an action to go play the piano or to read a book or play with toys. Picture symbols are the other type of symbols you can use, and they're fabulous because they can come in any size, shape, color. You can use them through eye gaze or pointing. You can use them to work on increasing sentence length, and you can use them without or with a speech generating device depending on what you have access to. And there's lots of different devices or ways to use picture symbols without speech devices. You can use pictures. I like to use Boardmaker pictures. Boardmaker is just a super friendly, easy software program that you put on your computer, and it allows you to just make grids of whatever pictures you type in, and it's got a bunch of symbols to represent nouns, verbs, whatever you need. And so this right here is just a little bit of carpet. I bought it from Walmart. It's in the auto section, and it is, I call it car carpet. It comes in a big roll for about $8, and you can make little Velcro boards if you are going to do a bunch of little pictures. You can just use Velcro on the back of them and it allows you to stick your picture symbols onto a board and move them around however you want and change how many you need. If you have a client who can only handle 2 pictures at a time, you move away the rest and just let them use 2, and you can add what you need. We just made it by sewing the 2 pieces of carpet onto a piece of cardboard. And when I'm working in a group, I like to use a really big board so that we can make different charts with our symbols and sort them out and categorize our different concepts. So that's just one type of no-tech communication devices that's super cheap and easy. And even for my clients who use high-tech devices, I like them to know how to use low-tech devices as well, because high-tech tends to crash and burn on us. And they still need to use opportunities to point, and you use eye gaze to communicate with just picture symbols. Some other types on the PowerPoint, they're showing you how there's the flip and communicate wrist wrap. I think that's just kind of funny. They just made it portable. But anyway, you can make a picture board and make it portable so that it's usable. There's the eye gaze board. That's just a piece of plexiglass. You can go get plexiglass from your local hardware store, Home Depot, Lowe's, and have it cut in a square, and then have the square cut in the middle so that you can see through it. And as the client looks at the picture symbols, you can see which way their eyes are gazing. That would be for someone who doesn't have the motor skills to point and directly select their symbol. And then the communication books, the picture on the PowerPoint is a pretty fancy one, but we make these for our parents all the time, just with a bunch of picture symbols all organized together. We'll just make them we'll just put whatever picture symbols that they will need and clip them together with a little ring so that mom can just pack them in her purse so that we can introduce symbols into the child's life as needed. And then we can start adding some speech to our picture symbols if we're lucky enough to have some equipment or can work on getting some. Like the Big Mac switches and 2 message communicators and the Cheap Talk 4 just gives you opportunities to add more symbols and to add speech to them. These are very low-tech devices where all you'd have to do is just program in your own voice. They're relatively cheap. They get more expensive as you want more recording time on them or different levels to record various different levels of topics. The put 'em arounds are, I really like them. They're super helpful to just put around the room. We put them in some preschools. We put one in a little preschool gym where some kids with autism had a chance to play. And even though some of those kids could talk, we'd put a few different messages around the room. So when they climbed to the top of the ladder or the tower, they would hit the button that says, "Hey mom, look at me," or "Look up here, I made it." And it's, even though some of these kids can talk, they rarely would initiate any interactions. And so this way their love for buttons, as they hit a button, it would encourage them to then start an interaction, and we taught everyone to respond. Or we put one in a tunnel where they'd crawl through the tunnel, and if they hit the button, it would say, "Come find me." So to put all these little messages around at a rather cheap kind of way to add some voice to someone's life is a fun way to add some interactions that they can start on their own. This is another Big Mac switch that I use a lot. This one I love to put for our little kids. I just tell mom or dad to take it home, put their own picture in it, and record in mom, so that as the child who is a young child just is playing around the house, they just bump the button and holler out mom or dad, whatever we've recorded in, and mom is then taught, if she is to respond, like, "Oh, you called me," and to run over and give them some attention. So even though at first, although this says family, at first children generally don't know what the picture symbol is going to mean. Doesn't mean we can't give it to them until they know it, but as they practice and explore, lots of kids are really willing to push a button. As they explore, they'll then learn what it means. Then there are more devices as they get more buttons and a little more recording time, so sometimes referred to as medium tech devices. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I've just put a couple pictures of examples on this. There's a 32 message communicator, there's Go Talks, there's like 6 level communicators and a communication builder. These are nice, they're great, they're relatively inexpensive. They allow you to use generally Boardmaker symbols or any other symbols that you pull together to slip in pages. You manually have to change page by page, and you manually have to record in your own speech on these types of devices. They work great for getting kids just started with some picture symbols, but if you know a child who can communicate with something such as the 32 message communicator and can do a couple different pages, then they really need a high-tech communication device if they can handle that many symbols. It gets used. I see them in the schools a lot. Great to have. but if we can understand that many symbols, it's time to move along and get moving. So in terms of high-tech communication devices, these are generally computers. There are two main companies that sell high-tech devices. There's a few other out there, but the two main companies are the PRC company, which stands for Pancuronic Company, and they sell devices such as the Springboard and the Echo and the Vantage Light, and they are a great company to work with. Their website allows you to download their software onto your own computer so you can explore it and use it and learn it. And you have the speech for 30 or 60 days, I can't remember exactly how many days, but then you can still access the symbols and interact with it so you can learn it and see if that's what would work for the child. And then the other company that sells high-tech devices is Dynavox, and they sell lots of different devices such as the Maestro, the V Plus, and the V Max, and the Tango, and the Dynarite. And so they all have different types of equipment. Both companies have their pros and cons. I like to, whenever I do an evaluation for a client, I like to sit down with both types of devices and say, okay, what does this child really need, and what can these communication devices do for me? Can it really meet their needs? And for the most part, both of these companies' systems will give you what you need. It's just a matter of they're set up very differently. And so it's not a matter of preference on what you like, it's a matter of what the client who's using the device likes, and the family, and how well they understand the language system behind it. And there's both companies offer representatives, so you can contact the company and they will allow you to get loaner devices. You just contact their representative in your area and they will help you get a loaner device to try out and experiment. So if you're a speech pathologist working with a client and you want access to this equipment to see which device would be best, they will work with you and help you see with training on how to work these devices. But I have a Springboard, and I can show you. The Springboard is the device from one of their smaller devices from the PRC company. And I really like it for our up to 3 setting because generally we only have kids from the age of 2 to 3 before they move on to the schools. It holds plenty of language to get us to a 3-year-old age. The thing I don't like about it is it has digitized speech, so it's recorded in there. So the speech that's in there sounds really good, but anytime you need to make a change, you have to record in your own speech. And so then you end up with a couple different voices running through the system, and that's not going to be the best. I would never recommend this device for a parent to purchase, but I do like using it for loaning devices because it's pretty inexpensive and I can get a couple out to a bunch of different kids. The thing I like about the PRC devices is that you can start out really basic and you can hide away some buttons that you don't want the kid to play with yet so that they get very successful with 1 or 2, and then open up the other buttons so that they can get into them. And when I set up devices, this was already set up in there, but sometimes when I set up other pages, it tends to be common practice to start with nouns and to work on requesting. I actually like to start with verbs or comments. And for example, I can say play. That one says play, and it opens up to the next page, and it encourages a sentence because then the child can accidentally bump bubbles or ball and make a sentence. So all of a sudden we've got a 2-word phrase instead of just going into a category of play and opening it up to bubbles where they would say bubbles. I like the verb to give us the word play bubbles, and we can do a 2-word phrase right off the bat and really encourage sentence structure. So, or it would say eat and then open up to some food options and
candy.
And I don't know if you can hear that, but it shows the difference of that was someone else's voices recorded in there because they wanted to specifically put in candy. So I don't have a Dynavox device to show you today, but they do have great features. It's set up very differently, and you can set these up to a whole lot more language. It's already programmed in for you, and then you just tweak it to fit the needs of the client. And one more option for new high-tech communication is the iPad. I'm still not so sure what I think of the iPad. My biggest fear is that new apps keep coming out, and we can't keep up with them. And then my fear is if I recommend one of these apps to someone, it will crash and burn before we're really good at it, and then we'll have to purchase another one. I'm not sure how well their companies are going to support their apps, and that's something we'll learn as the years go by. But 1 year ago, everyone was talking about the app ProLoquo Go, and before I could even purchase it, I heard from people, have you heard about the touch chat yet? And so I got the touch chat, and by the time I got that, they said, have you heard about Sonoflex yet? And so to keep up with the apps, I think that's actually going to be a concern. However, I do think the iPad has some application to communication, definitely has some application for education. And so it's something that needs to be learned and followed, and there's so many apps out there, it's hard to keep up. So this one is called Touch Chat, and it is set up in kind of a categorizing system. So this is the home page where you would have questions or people or actions or descriptions. And so you'd go into a category of people, and then you can start working on I, and then you can go back to the home page to go into actions, call, and you could put together sentences by going back and forth from category to category. The thing I fear about the iPad, something that has to be addressed, is the navigation of the device itself. For example, this one, in order to go back now, I have to either hit home page or there's a little tiny button, so someone's got to have some decent motor skills to access these buttons. Key guards could probably be made for this type of a device for someone with motor skills where they might bump more buttons. For sure, on your Dynavox and your PRC devices, there are key guards and ways to help modify for motor problems, but with this, not quite. It's going to have to be adapted on your own. And because someone can navigate easily out of the apps and go anywhere else they want, it tends to be more of game playing is what we're finding out, rather than wanting to work on communication. But the touch chat we've used with one client for quite a while, and he actually really enjoys it and does really well just interacting for fun, and that's what we want. And so it's been a really good, it's got quite a bit of language already stored in there. We haven't had to even program it all yet, and we can get quite a bit of interaction from him, so it's got decent vocabulary within it. The Sonoflex Lite is made by a company called Tobii, which is a communication device company, and they decided to jump on the iPad bandwagon. And so you can access their app on the iPad, learn it and use it, and you can even then move into their communication devices. And there's a setup with some really decent language structure to where, if you can see, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but you have like your pronouns and your subjects are going to be in yellow background, your verbs are in green, and it's color coordinated all throughout the app so that you know what you're using, negation or verbs or nouns, or descriptions are blue. This one's set up a little bit different. I haven't played with it enough to know if you can change the settings on it, but this one's really encourages sentence structure. So if I hit I, it doesn't speak yet, want, and it's going to put everything up here in a sentence bar. I want, and if I go into things, I can say balloon. And it hasn't said anything, but it shows that I've put together I want balloon up in the sentence bar, and then I touch the sentence bar, and it will then say I want a balloon. So that one helps encourage sentence structure, where the touch chat isn't going to encourage sentence structure. It's more just spouting out one-word phrases. So the iPad's got some application. It'll be interesting to see where it goes in the next few years. My fear is that people won't support the apps, and once it crashes, it might not be there for long, and I fear having to move from one type to another type. But I'm hoping that the Sonoflex by Tobii will last, because they're actually a company that might back them up, because they're a communication device company. So there's just some ideas, an introduction to the different equipment that's out there. Not all of the equipment that's out there, but just to show you a little bit what's out there. But when we say we have all these different types of equipment, we kind of have to fit what fits to the client and what they need and what's going to work best for them. But how do we start teaching it? How do we work from either object symbols or introduce picture symbols or a communication device to a client? Where do we start? And there's a few different strategies that you can start with. One of them is to model, meaning we're going to have parents and caregivers and teachers actually communicate with these symbolic strategies to show the client what it's like to communicate with symbolic communication. We're going to allow them opportunities to babble with their symbols. We're going to establish some routines or use existing routines within their day so that they're using this language as often as possible. And introduce songs and books for literacy. We'll talk about how we need to work on shared focus and natural consequences and setting up the environment. So first, modeling, like I already talked about, is where we'd have caregivers actually communicate with the symbols. And we have one question, so we're going to go to the question before we get into this.
Ingrid asks, are any of these devices adaptable to children with vision impairments, i.e. high contrast, color, etc.?
Some of them are. I don't know what language level this type of client you're talking about would be, but some of them allow you to have a bigger screen. Some of them have speech output where you can put in an earbud so that as someone scans across, whether they're using scanning or a direct selection, they can hear what their choices are and then go in and select it, and it would then speak it louder. So some of them would have some decent pictures depending on how poor the vision is or how good the vision is. And the beauty of using a real communication device is once your motor programming is planned, once you go in and hit that button, you get very familiar with where to go, even though you may not be able to exactly see what it is, if that makes sense. Just like on my telephone, I don't really look at the numbers anymore. I just go for a pattern. And that tends to be the case with many communication users who get very good at their communication devices. They use more of a pattern rather than paying attention to the symbols. So it depends on the vision. I'm not quite sure exactly how impaired it would be, but some have some auditory input to allow them to know what their options are. Some do have different pictures, and you can contrast the backgrounds and change the backgrounds to represent different types of topics. So yeah, they use it to adapt for vision a little bit. And then we're going to go back to modeling. This is where we just want everyone in this child's environment to communicate with symbols as much as possible. Because when a new baby is born, we'll sit and talk to that new baby, and we don't expect them to talk back for at least a good year. And for some reason, whenever we introduce symbolic communication to a child who's not speaking, we stick it in front of them and say, okay, push that button. And we expect them to talk back to us and communicate with us, but we've never shown them how to do it. And so I don't have any hard rules on how long someone should model and how much. Sometimes I've sat down with a kid and started modeling some communication for them, and right then they pick it up and start imitating. And then there's other clients we've worked with where we've modeled, and it's taken just a little while longer, but they start to pick up and imitate. And then there's a few others who really require a lot of modeling, and then later on we do some prompting to help as well. But initially, I think we need to model for the clients and really show them how to communicate with symbols. So either that's through sign language or object symbols or picture symbols, we have to demonstrate for them what we're doing. And what this will do for them is, one, it'll slow down our interactions so that they can actually have a turn. Usually we just talk and dominate interactions, but if I'm using picture symbols or object symbols or signing, it slows down my interaction so they can actually comprehend what's going on. Then we can also teach a variety of communicative intents, such as working on requesting or commenting, questioning, because generally we stick a few symbols in front of someone and work on them requesting to us, and they have a hard time getting out of just requesting. They need to have opportunities to comment, but if they've never seen someone comment, it's very hard to do. It will also help us determine what type of vocabulary is needed. As I sit and work through a routine and I'm trying to communicate to someone through this routine, sometimes I realize I don't have the words I need, so it helps me know what to program or what symbols to print off so I know what words I need to interact within that routine. Many children will just start to imitate. You don't have to teach them beyond that. They'll just start to follow along and take their turn. And that's really fun when you get a few clients like that. And this will really help to reduce the dependency on prompting. Sometimes we start out from the bat and say, okay, push this picture. We grab their hand and make them hit the button. And then they'll just wait for us to always do that. So by just not ever saying hit the button, touch the picture, or hit that button and grab their hand and do it for them from the start, don't do it. Don't say hit the button, don't say push the picture. Just take it out of your vocabulary and don't say it, especially at the start. Later on, you can introduce some different types of prompting, but it needs to be carefully done. And we don't want kids to always just sit around and be follow direction kids, where they will only ever push a button to say something if you tell them to say it. Then that's really not communication. Our goal is to work on communication, not button pushing. So try to reduce your efforts in making them hit the button, wait for them to do it, or encourage them to do it by showing them what it'll do for them. And it'll aid in their comprehension as they see the pictures that you're touching or see the signs. It'll help them comprehend what it is you're communicating to them. Another strategy that I like to use is babbling, just like we would with any little 6 to 8, 9-month-old baby. As they start to use their voice and move their lips around, they start to babble, and they just play with sounds. and they might accidentally slip out ma, and as we respond to it, it becomes the word ma after time after time. So we want to allow our clients to have opportunities to just hit the buttons. We want to, especially for someone without very good motor skills, we want to put a button or a switch or a communication device that they can access where they'll just bump into it and cause something to happen. And it gives them opportunities to explore and the power of communication and find out what might happen. They will not know what will happen until it comes, but neither does the child who happens to just blah, spit out the word ma. They didn't know what was going to happen until it happens. And so we teach the parents and caregivers to really respond and imitate that babbling. And we want to position that device where they can independently hit it, not where we grab their hand and make them hit it. So no prompting at this point. We want them just to bump into it and then see what happens. So what do we want them to babble? Well, you can babble anything you want in their routines and their environment, but some ideas are family members' names, teachers' names, staff names if they're up for it, to responding to their name over and over. Animal sounds, if you're playing with animals, little zoo animals or stuffed animals, to where a button could say moo, 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 quack, 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 and whether it's right or wrong, it doesn't matter. When initially teaching symbolic communication, it's better to work on helping that child to initiate and be independent communicators rather than accurate independent communicators or accurate communicators. We don't need them to be accurate yet. We just want them to try and see what happens. So lots of things where there's really no right or wrong really helps with babbling, where we can respond. If a kid were to hit the button that said beep, 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 then mom can come in and drive her car with him and say, yeah, beep, 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 here comes my car too, just like we would as if the speech had come out. When they're exploring, I already gave these examples of, crawling through a tunnel or a box, putting a button in there that would say, come find me, or climbing to the top of a tower of cushions where they can yell out, I made it. Requesting actions for like a wind-up toy or letting go of a balloon, or tickle me, and calling out names of other students within a class for their turn in an activity is a good classroom kind of a setting way to use babbling, or cheering on a sporting event or a game show. So lots of different ideas. You can come up with them. It really depends on what the child's doing in their life and what they would need. But no right or wrong, where they can just holler out something and someone can respond to it. A lot of parents will say, well, how much do I need to model throughout the day? How often do I need to let them babble? And I always say as much as you can. I know it's not possible to do it all day long. So I usually teach people to start out in routines and find what routines are already there in their day. Because if they do something every morning, then that's where we want to start, is so it gets done every day, every morning, because that routine's already there. And so I like to start out using routines that are already there, and if I can't find routines that are there, then I will help that family or within the school system set up some routines. And so we work with care routines, play routines, songs and books are routines. And if we can get songs and books into someone's life, those songs and books are already a script. And if we can get them into a daily routine, the language is going to be great to work with. So after you find some routines that are in someone's life, then you start to script them out, kind of write out, well, what are the words that I could say? What are the words that I could expect the child to say? And then you get those symbols set up and you just start doing that routine and model for them as you go through and hope they start imitating. And if they don't start imitating, then once in a while you just pause to allow them to try. And then you keep going from there and do the routine over and over and over and over so they get practice and more practice. So you can use like getting dressed routines, eating routines, bedtime routines, and coming and going routines. Sometimes as families have their dinner time routines where they'll sit down to dinner and say, okay, tell me what you did today. And all the kids get to go around and talk about what they did during the day. And so we'll let them use a communication device to program in, well, what are some of the things that this other little kid did as well? And they can just blurt it out whenever they're ready. And within play routines, some examples of how those can be scripted up is, for example, if you're rolling balls or cars down a ramp, the script would be ready, set, go. And you just holler out ready, set, and allow someone to then say, go. So within playing, these are just two little kind of buttons. You just record in your voice and hit go. If we were doing a block routine where we like to play blocks and knock them down, play blocks, knock them down, we could put in a picture symbol that says, this one, you probably can't see it, it says knock it down. So I would record in knock it down. So as I'm playing and knocking things down, I can say, all right, ready, set, knock it down. And as I establish that little sentence or that little script, then I would pause and let the client or student then say knock it down and have me knock it down. And that works great, but when we want to follow someone's lead, especially little kids, they tend to bounce from activity to activity to activity. So if we use the more basic word like go, then if we move from cars to blocks to balls to something else to pushing in a swing, I don't have to change my symbol. I can use my symbol go for ready, set, go, push me in the swing, ready, set, go, knock down the tower, ready, set, go, drive the car, and I can continue to use this symbol over and over because it's going to fit a lot of different settings. And I don't have to keep changing my symbols over and over, and I can really teach this one symbol really well within a bunch of different settings. So to pick your symbols wisely, to start out with, we call it core vocabulary, words that you would use a lot in a bunch of different settings. If you start with those kind of words, it helps so that you can get it used more frequently, more often. Songs and books are already scripted. They are a great way to introduce language. They have rich language and allows for great interactions. And right from the start, kids need to have interactions with books as often as possible for literacy interactions. So I think books should be introduced right as fast as possible. And if you have an opportunity to put some interactions on a device with some speech output, it allows the child more opportunities to interact through the stories. Within songs and books, they're easy to model the signs and symbols because they will be same every time you read them. So once you learn them once, and once you've got them, you can use them over and over and over, and repetition is one of the best ways to learn. And when we use songs and books, it'll give a good representation of language, a visual representation of language. I don't know too many 2-year-olds who have actually seen a real frog. I'm sure there's a few. But if we were to sing the song 5 Green and Speckled Frogs, it really wouldn't mean much to them in terms of language. It's got good rhythm, it's got good rhyme and repetition. But as soon as I put it into pictures for them, it helps bring a little bit more knowledge and language to their good language base. And so by putting it into pictures and a communication device, this one's a repetitive song. So when you get to the glub glub part, you pause and let them say glub glub or yum yum. And they wouldn't expect them to do it right off the bat, but if you sung over and over and over and paused and shown them how to do it, then I would expect them to join in, and most kids do. Songs and books also encourage vocalizations. So this song we used, it followed the raindrops for lemon drops and gumdrops. If you don't know the song, Google it or look it up on Barney. Barney would sing it. It encourages vocalizations because in the middle of the song you all sing and so to pause right there, and whether the kid uses a communication device or actually starts going it really helps encourage some vocalizations as well. We used this book called Dinosaur Roar for a little boy once, and just by putting on a communication device like this, we just roared in it. And as he went through the book, he got to roar at the dinosaurs and play with a little dinosaur toy. It didn't take more than a couple of days of roaring with the communication device where he actually started roaring himself. And every time he played with a dinosaur, then he was roaring, and we were working on some good sounds with him. And songs and books are generally, most kids like to do them over and over and over, which is great because as soon as they're learned, you want to pause for that repetitive part of the story and let them fill in the gap. A lot of times I have parents who say, you know, I sat down to read them the book, we had the device all set up, and then my child just walked away from me, didn't want to do it. And you say, you know what, you can't just strap them in and force them to do it. You have to really follow your child's lead. And that's when picking up on some symbols like more, go, stop, and come, and those kind of core words will help so that you can just keep the same symbols flowing from activity to activity and just follow your child's lead. It's important to just join in with what the child's doing rather than pull them towards what you want to do, and to build on the child's interest. So instead of just saying, okay, today we're going to learn this word, it's more important to find out, well, what are they already interested in, and teach them the words for what they're already interacting in better and what routines they already have. And it's really important to follow natural consequences. Even if the child makes a mistake by pushing a wrong button, we still need to respond rather than saying, you're wrong. We respond, and when their face says, wait a minute, that's not what I want, then you can respond to them and say, okay, your face looks like you're telling me you don't want this, so that's what you told me, so let's go through, do you really want this, and really model for them the right way that they could have said it, rather than just ignoring the wrong mistake. We need to actually respond to their mistakes so that they learn. You can't force the child to participate, And do not ignore pre-symbolic forms of communication. And what I mean by that is whenever we introduce symbols to children, sometimes we really pay attention to the communication within the symbol, and we tend to ignore what their body's telling us. And so what we want to do is make sure that we don't ignore their eye gaze, we do not ignore their pointing, their reaching. So sometimes what will happen is I might set up a little coloring activity or something where normally within the routine I hold up 2 crayons and say, okay, what color do you want, red or blue? And before there's symbolic communication, chances are the kid will either look at which choice they want or reach for it, and I'd give it to them. Well, if I'm going to introduce symbolic communication into a setting like this, if I continue to do the same routine by saying, okay, what color do you want, yellow, red, or blue, the child's still going to use what always worked for them. They're still going to look at or reach for what I want. And what I see happen a lot, and I used to do it myself, I used to say, okay, what color do you want, yellow or blue? And the child would reach for it, and I'd say, use your words and point to the picture. And really that's not communication. They already communicated, and they should allow them to communicate with their primitive behaviors, because we're not trying to get rid of those primitive and conventional behaviors. We're trying to just support them when it doesn't give them enough. So if they've communicated through eye gaze or reaching, we should allow them to. So what that means then is we've got to change the way we set up our environment. And so when we set up our environment, it means we can no longer just offer our 2 choices unless we're going to let them communicate by looking or reaching. So now those choices have to be hidden or put in some clear containers where they can't get them out and they have to request some help to get it. The objects can be put up way high or hidden away so that they can't see it. And sometimes I find that a lot of clients who have not had opportunities with symbolic communication throughout their life, that they really don't talk or communicate about anything outside of the room. It's gone. They don't know about it, they can't communicate about it, so that's kind of hard for them to learn. So by giving them opportunities to babble and then things appear, really helps them understand that they can talk about things outside their room. It's important to make sure you have the communication device or those object symbols available to the client as much as possible. A lot of parents, as we start into some communication devices, they'll say, well, they're just playing with it, they're just making noise and just pushing the button over and over and over and over, and it's noisy. And I say, no, you can turn it down, but you can't turn it off and you can't take it away, because this is now going to be the child's voice and this is their speech. It's like taking duct tape. Although we have lots of kids we'd love to put duct tape over their mouth, we can't do that with these devices. And they do need to go through a time where they just can make some noise and actually just explore what's happening. So we get some kids where we say, just give them their time to make some noise. And then just like any other kid, if they're being noisy at a time they shouldn't be noisy, you have to teach them, right now's not the time. Right now's not the time. Shh, you need to be quiet, just like you would with any other kid, because you can't take their mouth away, so you'll not be able to take away their communication device either. And when we're working on their environment, we really need to work with the communication partners. Who are the people who are going to be communicating with this client? Is it going to be other peers at school? Is it going to be brothers and sisters, moms and dads, or babysitters? And we need to teach them to slow down their interactions, because we always tend to dominate them. We need to teach them not to ask too many questions. If everything's always a question, then it's always a test for this poor child. You know, what's your favorite color? And they have to ask and they have to answer. And if we're always asking them questions, then we're always giving them a test, and that gets hard on some kids and they'll refuse to communicate anymore. We need to make eye contact with the child who's communicating with their device, and we need to listen to what they're actually saying. Sometimes we see 2 clients sit side by side and they look at their device and communicate back and forth. And frankly, I like a 90-degree angle, because if you're sitting at 90-degree angle from the client or the person that you're sitting with, or on the floor as you're sitting on the floor, if you're sitting at 90 degrees, then you can actually look each other in the eye and communicate with each other rather than just always communicating about what's going on within the device. And it's important to make sure that the communication partners don't always dominate those interactions, that they allow the child to initiate interactions. And sometimes that means a lot of waiting time, to just kind of sit and wait that you're expecting them to do something. And we've put 20 minutes into some of our clients where they had access to their communication device, the routine was established, they knew it, it had been practiced over and over, it had been modeled, and then we waited, paused, and gave them their turn, and just waited and waited and waited. And the one client we worked with, he knew he was expected to do it, and we gave him 20 minutes, and he finally put in his return, and the reward was worth it, that we no longer had to wait 20 minutes. So sometimes waiting is one of your best teaching tools, so that the client will have a turn to jump in and interact. And I'm done there, so if anyone has any questions, you can send them my way, but there's lots of different strategies out there to go on from here, but those are going to be the strategies that will help you get started to model and to allow opportunities to babble. Within the school setting, it's a little bit harder to do because there's not a lot of teachers who will let you just let a kid babble and make noise, but you can set up different situations where they have an opportunity to holler out at certain times and let them have opportunities to babble. And so it's nice to be able to get some equipment at home where they can practice at home as well, if it's possible. And so now I'm going to turn the time over to Story. She's got a little bit more information to tell you before we end.
Okay, don't log off. I just want to go through a couple things real quick that are important. First of all, if you would please take the time to take our short evaluation. That link is on the AggieCast page, just to give us some feedback of how we did in future trainings you'd like to see and whatnot. And again, we apologize for the technical difficulties. This will be archived later in a few different places, and I'll be sending an email out about that so that you can watch that again later. Also, DVDs are going to be available. They'll be closed captioned, so it'll be a few weeks before they're available. But if you're interested in that, please send me an email about that. Also, you can find, again, the archived previous trainings we have done at our blog on utahatprogram.blogspot.com. Also, just a reminder on our future trainings we have coming up. We have one on February 15th. It will be Assistive Technology and Early Intervention Part 2 by UATP's occupational therapist Amy Henningsen. This online training will provide additional assistive technology ideas for early intervention, including positioning, mobility, adaptive play, computer access, and daily activities of feeding and bathing that are available commercially and or customized. Resources will be provided. We also have one coming up in March called Alternative Input and High-Tech Switch for Power Mobility. Watch for more on those in emails for me, as well as blog posts that will give you more details on how to register for those later. And we want to thank Stacy for taking the time to do this today, and we appreciate all of those of you who attended and stuck with us through our technical glitches. If you guys have questions about anything, feel free to email me, story@storee.powell, Powell,